mass transportation, right? Since that's kind of my passion. Um, so we're talking a little bit about what's happening at City Lab and their article on what the heck do we do now to preserve public transit ridership and while we're dealing with coronavirus and what happens after. And I really want to focus on the what's going to happen now because we're still in the middle of what do we do? Um, and they have some pretty good recommendations on things like heavy sanitization. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Just you're going to have to up the sanitization between routes and but how do we do that, especially for long distance routes? Because if you live in a city and you take a bus route that sometimes they go for a full hour and a half or more just in one direction before they come around and you come back, and how do you schedule that? So I'm thinking that at some point that's going to cause a lot of delays in how we schedule things. And outside of places like Chicago or New York City, where you do have some pretty stellar public transit over there, and a lot of people depend on it, and so you have more buses in your fleet. But I'm out here, and Russell, I've been in San Diego. I've used public transportation in San Diego. As you head out from the main San Diego hubs, and you get out way out in the hinterlands where, you got maybe one bus an hour, what happens then? So that's one. And then the one thing that definitely jumped out at me was the use of the handheld temperature scanner before people are allowed to get on public transit.
Oh, wow.
This is America. We don't like to cooperate with anything for our own good. And you're telling us that they need to stand there and be scanned before they get onto the bus? I've ridden public transportation since I was a kid. I have never seen people deal properly, even with putting the money into the box on a daily basis without grumping. Stand here and get your temperature scanned. And I mean, these are all good recommendations, and some of them are things that should have been done immediately, like provide transit workers with proper PPE. But
yeah.
I believe that song is now, it's number one on the charts and it's old at the same time. And I don't know when that's going to happen. Requiring people to cover their faces. Well, where I live in YOLO, we have a mandatory face covering rule that went into effect this Monday. They're not ticketing you, but it is mandatory that if you go outside, you've got to put on your face mask. Anything, please, people. And I came back from a walk before the show, and how many people do you think I saw out there without a face mask? Easily half. People are not following any instructions because they feel fine. And until people don't feel fine, they don't say, let me just preserve my life and yours and put on a face mask. So there we go with that. And on top of that, another great suggestion was coating surfaces with copper. Because copper, and smack me with a feather, but I didn't know this, copper is antiviral.
Antiviral, antibacterial. It's very harsh.
It renders viruses inactive. I did not know that. So they propose coating the surfaces, the metal surfaces, with a copper coat.
Yeah, before I
knew this silver was, but I didn't know copper was too.
Yeah, but they're both of the same method, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought
both of them are really cheap too.
No.
That's what I was saying.
Might be one place there's a little difference between the two.
What was that, Tony?
I thought my videos were the only thing that was antiviral.
Oh.
So did they also address how to do the distancing requirements on these?
That is the one thing that we never hear talked about, and I have been trying to prepare a little query letter to bus manufacturers and saying, hey, what do you got on the drawing board? Because this is not going to go away. We're going to have to come up with something. I can tell you that local public transportation is mandating that you enter at the back of the bus. So you have to go to the back and not walk up to the front. And much like frontline workers in grocery stores and postal workers, and not just the doctors and nurses, but the staff of hospitals who do the cleaning and things like that, and garbage men, we are seeing transportation workers dying of coronavirus. A very notable one was a guy who filmed his complaint that this woman was coughing all over the place in the bus, would not cover her mouth, and he was worried about corona. And I think, it was 2 weeks later, he was dead of coronavirus?
Yeah,
Exactly.
It was really sad.
It's very sad. So this is an ongoing problem, and I'd like to believe we have ongoing solutions happening. But I also am an adult person who's lived a long time among human beings, and I just, I can see that we're going to have problems instituting most of these recommendations, although they're really good. And I also do wonder, I don't think that people have really considered that we might have to prepare for a future where for the next 5 to 10 years, because people think herd immunity is something that just happens. We just all get sick and we'll have the antibodies. And what they've found out with the antibodies of coronavirus is that's just not how it works. You can be sick with coronavirus multiple times. It doesn't.
Well, okay, I don't know that that's true. The New York Times article that said that has been called into question.
It has been called into question?
Yes, yeah. It could have just been their antibody testing wasn't correct.
False positive?
Yeah, so I've heard that, but I want to throw out a little grain of salt there just to say, we're not epidemiologists.
Yeah, we're not, and we are not. And I'm only going because I did read that article, and I read, and I looked at a couple of things where they said the antibodies weren't as high as they had hoped that would come out of people who had recovered. And they can't guarantee that if you get coronavirus, you're going to recover. And recovering from coronavirus does not mean your body returns to the same state it was before coronavirus. You can recover
permanent lung damage.
Permanent lung damage, I believe, to other parts of your body.
Huge.
Even
Amputations,
kidneys, and I think also they said esophageal tissue and things like that, which is why? And we're not even touching on the weird clotting factors that go into the coronavirus that can cause strokes. And that's a whole other thing. And kids I think they've had at least one kid die of their weird disease side effect, which is they got sick with coronavirus and they have Kawasaki syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's at least killed one kid. So this is an ongoing problem, and we're going to have to do something about it because there is no one path to full sustainability for the human race going onward. Cars are great, and it's great that we have electric cars, and we're going to move towards manufacturing them, but society will always have strata, we'll always have economic issues, and we are going to need a way to move people from place to place efficiently and cleanly and protect everybody's health, the workers and the people using the transit. And I'll see what else I can turn over, and any new developments, I'll bring them here.
I wonder if they could do like those air curtains when you walk into a building or open a drive-through window and put a HEPA filter on them and just push all the air straight down. Like little cubicles.
Those meat market heavy vinyl things.
Yeah, something like that.
Only stay here. You stay in your corner.
And then the air blows over you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've heard that in some areas, used car sales are spiking because people don't want to take public transportation anymore, and they still have to get to work, and it's not easy financially because that's why they didn't have a vehicle in the first place. But or maybe they just like public transportation. I have several friends who could definitely afford nice cars but prefer to take public transportation, and so for anybody that for a lot of people where it was optional, they are now opting to own a private vehicle instead, which is too bad. But I understand it. I mean, you don't want to be around people who are coughing on the bus, then you find a way to not take the bus.
Or worse, where you don't know that they are
they
ill.
May not know.
Yeah, because
asymptomatic.
They could be ill for 14 days ish before they even know or even suspect that they or a carrier. And
Well, and let's also, I mean, this is something that we've certainly preached on this show repeatedly, which is it's great. Yeah, you get a car, you don't have to mix with the general public, right? And maybe you're safer. Of course, while you're driving your car, what's coming out the tailpipe? What's giving all the kids in the neighborhood asthma? What's polluting it for everyone else? Now, I'm not saying sacrifice your family so the rest of us can live, but I'm saying none of these things are free.
Right.
There's
This is the balance.
Yeah. So maybe rather than the default being the car thing, maybe we should work harder on the mass transit thing.
Yeah.
Make your city bikeable and walkable, because then you're not jammed in a tight space with anybody or putting out noxious elements.
Yeah.
One of the things I found most fascinating in the article here in City Lab was what they had talked about, the short-term cuts to save transit agencies money during the crisis. And, we had talked about this before. I mean, here in Chicago, Metro Rail has reduced the number of trains that they're running. They've reduced the number of stops they're running, where they used to do 3 runs an hour, maybe it's 2, or maybe it's once an hour. Here in the article, they did a good job of talking about the mistakes that many of the transit authorities made in 2008 when they saw the ridership decline. They made cuts in order to save money, but they made those cuts permanent.
Yes.
They never went back to pre-crash periods. But there was one example that they cited that did go back, and they brought everything back up to the way it was before, and their ridership actually increased. And Patrick, I don't want you to get a big head.
Too late.
God. Good luck with that.
I know,
Did we already
right?
discuss them on the show?
But yes, I can't say enough good things about the stupid Portland TriMet. Yes, they did see their ridership increase after the event because they made the cuts, they saved the money, but as soon as the crisis was over, they went back to where they were before. And that was a sign of confidence, and people got back on the trains, and people saw the benefits of mass transit. Where everywhere else around the city or around the country, they made the cuts, and they kept the cuts. You can't grow the business back up if you don't give people the opportunity to increase ridership.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the things when I worked in government that my boss told me that he never, ever, ever closed out his books for the end of the year for our department with a positive number. He got it to as close to 0 as possible because he said, if it looks like you don't need that money, they'll take it from you and your budget will be cut by that amount. It's better to be 0 or a little over so you maintain your funding, because the mindset they have isn't that, oh, well, expenses fluctuate, and if we have a net positive one year, great, we'll just roll it into next year's budget and you'll have a little bit more in case there's an emergency. They don't think like that. They're like, oh, you trimmed expenses. Well, from here on in, you'll never need that money ever again. And they'll cut it by that much. And that's a dumb idea.
They treat
Dumb
it like a business.
Yeah.
Instead of a service.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an ongoing issue. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Georgia. I mean, it's, we talk about mass transit a lot, and as much as we talk about we want more electric vehicles on the road, the nuance is we want fewer vehicles on the road. We just want a higher percentage of those fewer vehicles to be electric vehicles. We actually would prefer fewer cars and more people taking mass transit, whatever form it is.
Or a
Yes.
walkable city.
Yeah, several cities I was in Europe, like every 5th block was pedestrian only. I'm like, this is awesome. I can walk around this whole city. And it's so much nicer. You don't have the fumes. You don't have to worry about if I step in the street, I'm going to get nailed. It was great. And I wish more cities in the U.S. would do something like that.